Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this month's Big Buzz Breakfast Club. Today, we're going to be talking about volunteer management to grow your programs, and we are so excited to have you with us. We'll start with just a couple of housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be shared with you after the event. We also always share the email with those who register but are unable to make it due to scheduling conflicts. As we are progressing through today's presentation, if you could put the questions that you have in the Q&A, we will be happy to address them at the end of the presentation. And we have allotted time to be able to review any questions that go unanswered throughout the presentation or anything that you want a little more information about. And then we also have next week's roundtables where we can also do more personalized discussion. So I encourage you to join us for that, as that is where we are far more participatory and really get to be able to drill down into your particular questions as well. And then if you to turn off the closed captioning, simply click the button at the bottom of your screen and you can select disable, as we have been utilizing this feature more and more lately to make our programs available to everyone. I'd like to tell you just a little bit about who I am and what makes me, kind of want to talk about my volunteer experiences and where I come from. But I am the founder, owner, and CEO of Big Buzz Idea Group. My name is Melissa Lagowski, and Big Buzz Idea Group has been founded to power nonprofit organizations to fuel positive change in the world. I was previously an executive director for a small nonprofit where I was responsible for 24 events a year, 12 newsletters, 8 committees, 225 members, and I was a staff of 1. We did at one point have a volunteer pool of a couple hundred people, and it was work that I loved doing, but unfortunately I got incredibly burnout. I left and I went to corporate America where I was miserable. So I quickly decided to become a resource for nonprofit organizations that just have gaps or need help occasionally throughout their year, and thus Big Buzz was born. We focus on the fact that many nonprofit executives lack the time, staff, skills, and the funding that they need to perform at the highest level. Big Buzz Idea Group fills gaps in management, marketing, and event services so you can focus on the big picture and position your organization to thrive. I'm excited to talk about volunteer management today because prior to COVID, the team here at Big Buzz Idea Group managed over 1,000 volunteers annually. We love to share information with others so that we can continue to help you elevate in your organizations. As we go through this morning's session, we will be talking about how you can prepare for success on volunteer management, how you recruit volunteers, how you manage those volunteers, and what you can do post-season to retain your volunteers. There are a lot of pieces on this journey that I think are incredibly important. And unfortunately, as busy people in a nonprofit, oftentimes we just don't have the time we need to stop and focus on each of these core components. So we're going to walk through it today, and then I'm happy again to answer any questions at the end. So when you prepare for success with your volunteers, it is a lot like hiring for your organization. And maybe some of you have experience hiring and maybe some of you don't, but it all starts with planning. It starts with that goal setting. It starts with knowing what you want to accomplish, because the clearer that you are in your mind and the more that you can commit that to paper, then the easier that's going to be able to be shared with your volunteers or with the people that you're reaching out to find the people that are really the right fit for you and what you need. Sometimes it might be a particular expertise. Sometimes it might be friendly people that you just need to run your registration desk. So to really think about, maybe it's a technology need that you need behind the scenes. And so to think about whether it's tied to maybe a particular event or a more general need that you may have at your organization, you really want to start out your goal setting and know what you hope to accomplish with those volunteers. And they might have several different categories, which is okay too. You want to analyze and outline those needs. You know, could your marketing use an infusion? Would you like to have a committee around that? Too often when I was the executive director, my committees were, this could be a whole different workshop, a presentation for sure, but the committees would often just give me more work to do when I was already tapped and stretched and couldn't do anymore. So really finding and being clear, right, that you need people to contribute if that's what you're asking for versus just strategize, or whether it's brainstorming and idea creation. But again, the clearer you can be on the front end, the more likely you are to find people who actually will mesh with what you're looking for. So I really do encourage you to think about all of the needs that would benefit your organization, whether it's behind the scenes in the office. Sometimes it's social media creation, sometimes it's design pieces. And then again, sometimes it's that largest event where you just can't do it all yourself and you need people to help at the registration desk, help set up the auction, help collect prizes, or whatever the case may be. But the more you can outline and create that list of your needs, then you can start to create mini job descriptions. This may sound a little daunting, but it really doesn't have to be. They can just be short narratives. We do this a lot with some of our largest events, because even with our security officers, as an example, that we need some at certain posts and they have certain responsibilities. So we're putting them, maybe we're putting security at the gate to perhaps make sure that the COVID protocols are adhered to. So whatever that core responsibility is, even if it's just a couple of bullet points, it starts to give clarity to the person who's going to be assigned that task and helps them prioritize and know why they're there. So I think there's real value in creating those job descriptions and being able to detail out what you need from those people. You want to prepare for sign up. And when you are thinking about your sign up, really think about all of the information that you're going to need. Too often, I love to use myself as a prime example, because I think there's a lot of things in my early days I did completely wrong. And I'm not too ashamed to talk about it, because I hope it helps you do better. But, lots of times I wouldn't realize all the information I was going to need. And so, I would have to go back to the volunteers multiple times. And when I have to go back multiple times, then, that can form some relationships and what have you, but it can be very time consuming for me, who also has other responsibilities. And it's no different for you as a busy nonprofit professional, that, if you can get everything you need right on the first registration, then you're just going to be positioned far better to continue your communication and not have to keep going back and following up and chasing a bunch of loose ends. So I encourage you to really think through, how do you want to communicate with people? What do you want to know? And make sure you're getting all of that detail on your registration form. And we will talk a little bit about preparing for the sign up, but also making sure that you are making that registration process simple. These days, there's so many wonderful technology platforms and what have you available, but just making sure that it's easy for the volunteers and that you are making opportunities for volunteers at all ages and all levels to also submit and participate, because these days some organizations are very tech heavy, and the older, some older people struggle a little bit with technology. I was just on a event this morning where there were some women, who didn't know how to copy and paste some information from one of their profiles into the group chat. So just keeping in mind that everybody's at some different comfort levels with technology, and that you are having a couple of ways for people to sign up, just to make sure you're not automatically excluding volunteers that could be very useful to you in the long run. And I do find too, as we think about that, there is I find a lot of people in kind of that older generation who maybe are retired, who are looking for ways to have some meaningful contributions. And so really being able to tap into that population is going to be important for you too. Foster your communication plan, I think, is something that, again, I remember my first, when I did my largest event as an executive director, we had 200 volunteers, as I mentioned. And we had some very early adopters, those people who, as soon as we created the volunteer form and put it out, they had automatically signed up right in the beginning. And so I was like, that's great. And I put them on the list. And then, in my mind, we were done. like until we got closer, I didn't have anything to report to them. And I just put them on the list and kind of held them there. As we got closer, by the time I started reporting out the plan for training and the plan for, showing up at the event, unfortunately, some of them started to say, I'm no longer available. I didn't hear back from you. I didn't think you needed me. And so now what we generally recommend to our clients is that you generally will have kind of a confirmation email that goes out, and tell those volunteers right then and there, these are the dates of the training sessions. And please note that you will hear from us again at this time as we get closer. So the more you can let them know and share with them again in one nice succinct email on the front end, the more you've just prepared yourself for down the road, to let them know what to expect and what volunteering with you is going to look like. We like to include training sessions for our largest events. We like to be able to, those pieces that are not sometimes you'll have specific needs where it might be working with one person, and those can be individual meetings. But we have a lot of events here at Big Buzz where we help our clients have very large events. And so there is a lot of communication that needs to happen. And we like to just be clear about that and foster those trainings so that we can download a lot of information to a group, to make it more time effective for everybody. And then obviously, I do think, as I'm mentioning, the onboarding and training of your volunteers is something that I think people often overlook. And I think that this is a great opportunity to even make sure, as part of that onboarding and training, that you're teaching people more about your organization than they might know at the onset. Really making sure that people understand kind of why what you do matters, sharing more statistics, the high level overview, but really helping them understand why the work they're doing is important, and then training them on why the work that you need them to do matters will be really important too. When we talk about that goal setting, I think that it's important for you to think, if the sky was the limit, what would you like to accomplish with your volunteer campaign? So I think we all have a lot of thoughts that, that swirl in our head. But again, I think being really intentional with your thoughts and documenting those really starts to make how you can leverage your volunteers to your benefit and to the benefit of your organization a much richer experience and a much more successful effort. So thinking about what would a successful volunteer campaign look like for the community that you serve, whether, whatever that community is, you clearly touch a lot of people, your clients, your constituents. What would that look like, and how would they benefit? Because sometimes you want to tell that story so that volunteers understand the importance of that work. Who would participate? Are there certain, skill sets? Are there certain demographics? Are there certain, a radius? Really thinking about who would participate in your ideal volunteer recruitment. Because sometimes when you can start to hone in that, oh, I need people who are tech savvy. Maybe you have an electronic auction, and maybe you're going to need people who can plug in and support that. So thinking about who then that has that technology experience may start to help you go where you can go to for recruitment. Perhaps one of your board members works at a technology company, and therefore you can start to find people who are easily comfortable with technology, and that might be a good way to recruit a handful of people. So just the clearer you can be on that, who would be participating and what skills or expertise, you might find some subsets that can help you do your outreach later. Again, why does this work matter? I think volunteers generally really want to know that they are doing something impactful. And I find that, they talk about the younger generations, the Gen X, the millennials, Gen Z. People want, regardless of those demographics and those segmentations, they want to make a difference. They want to contribute. So, and sometimes we have to help them see. I know one of the questions that came in this morning was in preparation for the session was, about helping volunteers understand the importance of maybe what seems very menial. And so sometimes it's a matter of helping people see how that task fits into the bigger picture, or help them understand why it matters. Because when you can tell the why of a task, it really does start to make it much easier for people to execute. I find all the time in managing people, which that's what you're doing with volunteers, that when you can explain the why behind a certain rule or a certain guideline or a certain task, that then people are more likely to adhere to those rules and follow that process. And then at the end of the day, what would this work mean to your organization? Again, people want to know that they are doing something that is helping in a valuable way. And so you have to help communicate the big picture and how this little task fits into making a difference in your organization. And that usually is a great thing to even repeat in your communication plan. Talk about it on the front end, talk about it in the confirmation emails, talk about it in the training, and then we'll talk about that again even in the wrap up, because you have to keep saying it. People are busy. I find that people are busier now than they've ever been in their lives. And therefore, sometimes we don't retain information. And so just really remembering to repeat those meaningful pieces of information, so incredibly important. And being able to say it for those people who hear, are auditory learners, being able to read it for those people who are a little more visual, but continuing to put that message out there is going to be really important to a successful volunteer campaign. I also think as you are going through the goal setting and doing some of the training in those pieces, the other thing that I love to talk about is, early in my career, I was a lot of I and me conversations, but you really want it to be we and us. This is a form of team building. And if your organization has a strong staff internally, you're probably likely a good team builder, and volunteers are an extension of that. But many of us in the nonprofit space, I know I was, on my own, learning by myself, staff of one. I didn't know what it looked like to be a good team builder at the time. And so over time, I've really learned, and being able to involve them, again, the we and the us really shows that they're part of this and that we're not just handing them tasks and assignments. And I think that it really makes, it helps create more meaningful contributions. It's important for you and your organization to also talk about what success looks like. So, most of us have that vision in our head. I feel like we think of it, we have it there, but we don't always give the detail out to the audiences we're speaking to that exists up here, but in the brain. And so the more you can commit that to paper and share that, the more that I think everybody starts to feel good about knowing if you're hitting it or not hitting it, or wants to help you hit it. So it could be a number of attendees that you're trying to get for your event. It could be the number of volunteers that you need. It could be the dollars that you're trying to raise. It might be a number of shares or likes if you're doing a social media campaign and you need some social media volunteer ambassadors. But those outcomes that you are trying to accomplish, it's so important for them to have that big picture and just know what they're contributing to. We often find that some of our largest events have as many as 600 volunteers, and we invite the volunteers to invite other volunteers. We help them understand that this is our goal, this is what we need, and they are excited when they can recruit another 1 or 2 people and know that they're helping us achieve our goal. So the more that you can involve people in kind of how, again, those smaller pieces, but how they connect to that bigger goal and the success of your organization, they just start to really feel connected and tied to you in a more meaningful way. And you will find that they can be really great supporters. I think the other thing that is so incredibly important and often overlooked in most of the organizations that we talk to is that you want to define what success looks like from all perspectives. it's only natural for human nature to think about our individual perspective. That's what we eat, sleep, and breathe 24/7, 365 days a year, right? It's all from our perspective. But we're really close to our organizations. We're in every meeting, we're in staff meetings, board meetings, committee meetings, we're at the events. So we often know these things. We may have even done these events many years in a row because a lot of your organizations will have the same programs or projects year over year for many years. But you might have a new volunteer who doesn't have that same perspective. You may have new staff who are still getting acclimated. And so really starting to be able to look at the success factors, or even helping people identify what their piece of the puzzle is, becomes really important, because you want to think about your staff perspective. Your staff may have different goals than your ultimate volunteers, right? Their role may be to make sure everything's set up on time, and their success might be making sure that they've helped recruit X number of volunteers for your event. So knowing what is expected of the staff becomes incredibly important. Knowing what's expected of the board and explaining and defining that, right? Oftentimes they're the ones we're looking for those dollars that we're trying to raise in conjunction with an event. We're expecting them to bring more donors, to maybe bring more, future donors, prospective donors, to invite potential sponsors into the room at the largest event, so that you can start to get to know those people better and let them see you at your highest, best moment of the year. And so that board perspective is going to look very different. They might need to be more ambassador-like at your event. So really communicating and, again, defining that out can be incredibly helpful. And then organizationally, what does success look like, right? Again, you have to know what your organization wants out of an event. And unfortunately, we do find too many nonprofits. I hope this is not you, but they do the same event over and over just because it's always been done. And if you've participated in some of our other workshops, you will always hear us say that you have to really reevaluate your events and confirm that they're on mission for what you're trying to accomplish. And are they meant to be fundraisers and future prospective donor development? Are they meant to be a fundraiser? And then you can start to really assess with some key performance indicators if they're meeting those goals. But it's so important for you to do that as an organization and just know what success looks like and what you need as a group. It helps set so much clarity at so many levels within your organization. And so I can't talk about that enough. And then, of course, from the volunteer perspective. And again, the volunteer perspective may be one small task. We organize a couple of very large scale events, and it's simply, we need some volunteers that simply pour beer. That is their role. That's what we need them to do. But we have to have them understand how that ties into the overall goal and what that perspective, what's their individual goal at the event, and how they still help set the tone, right? Because even in any of those service positions at the registration desk, I remember one event that I went to a long time ago, but it was a conference at a downtown hotel here in Chicago. And I walked up and I was greeted by the most unhappy people. And it felt very much like I was inconveniencing them, right? So your registration desk management, whoever that is, staff, volunteers, board members, like those people are ambassadors and they set the tone as they welcome guests into your event. So making sure that you're really clear, right, that they are supposed to be hosts and ambassadors, and helping them understand what that looks like starts to set the tone for the entire event. So it's something very small, but when you help them understand that they're really the first touch point to the event, that becomes a far more meaningful role, and helping them see how it connects to the larger picture. So again, when we talk about the roles in success, I think some of these pieces again stay very tied to some of the things we've been talking about, but everyone wants to feel like they matter. and they want to believe that their contribution matters. So I find that oftentimes, volunteers will move from organization to organization, looking for a place that makes them feel good about what they're doing. And so I think it's our job as nonprofit professionals to help them feel important and impactful in the work. And so that's, again, when we identify those success pieces and then talking about how does the board leadership play into that. I think too often we had a whole different session on board development and board work, and really, again, setting clear expectations with your board members so that they know what success looks like. They know if they're meaningfully contributing or not. Again, what are the staff responsibilities? What role will your volunteers play? And how does this matter, again, back to your community? Can you equate this to, X number of people, getting meals? Will this be, 50 people getting, beds or temporary shelter? So, is this 200 children getting backpacks for school? Like, really talking about how this initiative matters to the community that you serve within your organization is also something that helps your volunteers at all levels, board, your menial task supporters, anybody who's helping your staff on a regular basis in a volunteer role. It helps them understand when they know what you're achieving at the end of the year or in a 12-month span, and they see your stats and your metrics, it helps them feel like I'm part of that. And then you can connect that bridge to remind them, and in your messaging, make sure they know that it's possible because of them. So I think that that's one of the things that oftentimes we share the stats, but we don't let them know that their support had a role in allowing us to achieve those stats. And so it's a really small nuance in how we talk to people that I think makes a big difference. And again, when we are talking about success, staying focused on the mission, I think you can't talk about the mission enough with volunteers. And if I had it all to do over again, and I went back to 1999 and the first time I was an ED in those committees, I would have started every committee meeting with the mission. And I would have encouraged every volunteer at those committees to look through that mission lens to determine if the decisions that they were making were the right ones for the mission. And so just never losing sight of that. And again, because you touch it 365 days a year in your mind, in your ongoing commitment, but these volunteers may not. And so reminding them and talking about it frequently becomes incredibly important in this process. Again, I have put up some, possibilities for analyzing and outlining volunteer needs here. I think that it is very dependent on your organization. You are all incredibly different in how you serve and what you do. And I will think about, right, if it is a small community sports program, for example, you might actually need referees and umpires and coaches that volunteer. Other organizations, again, you may need board members, right? That's our highest and best need of volunteers always. And, so thinking about what that looks like, what you wish you had at each of these different possible levels or opportunities. Do you need greeters? Do you need administrative support? Maybe, I know my aunt volunteers at her church one afternoon a week just to answer the phones and help out, so is it small support that maybe you can work with somebody locally to do? Is it communications? Are there places that you wish you had more staff or you had more expertise? And do you just need a consultant to share some expertise? Or do you need somebody who can help on an ongoing basis? One of our clients has a committee and, it's a diversity committee and they work really hard at sharing content a couple of times, a month on keeping diversity top of mind, and they create those posts and they design those posts, and so that they know that they are constantly keeping diversity at the top of the organization's messaging and reminding everybody how important that is to the organization. So it might be in a space like that that you could utilize some help. Maybe it's around creating a schedule. You know, I was on with a organization yesterday who is a youth-based sports program, and they have to do a lot of scheduling. And they were talking about how labor intensive that is and what a process that is. And, you know, so maybe it's somebody who's had some experience around difficult scheduling, or maybe it's getting advice and training. One of the things that we don't talk a whole lot about today, but, you know, even in looking at, if you have volunteers who can even help you document what they do, that starts to become incredibly important in handoffs and training the future volunteers as well. And that is a way that it can be incredibly meaningful to help you have sustainability within your volunteer efforts, and that turnover and cross training as well. You know, is it servers? Again, do you need somebody to work the buffet table, or, you know, monitor the beverage station, or what does that look like? Raffle prize solicitation, you know, donated prizes. That's often a committee, and putting baskets together for the silent auction, collecting experiences and really elevating what your organization might be offering becomes incredibly important. Again, technology, right? I think technology is something that is, we've all been thrust into technological advancements in the last 18 months that were thrust upon us fast and furious. So I encourage you to think about, are there other ways you could, you know, apply technology? Do you have access to technological board members or technological, you know, savvy people that really could be a good source for you to tap, and maybe make sure your organization is operating at the best level you can? I know personally, the organization that I had volunteered with, they were not at the top of their game with technology. We were, you know, light years behind where most companies would have been. But technology is a tool that, if you invest in the right pieces, it can be a game changer for your organization. So thinking about, if you have somebody who knows how to monitor technology or knows a lot about apps and programs that exist, and just talking about what some of the struggles might be, those are some great ways for you to be able to plug in and find some technology to advance your organization. Registration, again, sometimes, you know, it's a matter of recording information. These days, you know, Dave has posted that they use volunteersignup.org. And, you know, for managing that sign up process. In the old days, right, we would take handwritten forms. I'm dating myself. I know, you know, this was when I was like 5, so please, no judgment here. But, you know, we would get handwritten forms, have to try to decipher the handwriting, put it into an Excel spreadsheet so that we could continue to communicate and track people. Nowadays, you know, you want to think through that whole process and how you automatically have it downloaded, and it's so much more accessible for easy follow-up and all of that. Some people use Sign Up Genius for those types of things. I see that Deja also mentioned Volunteer Match. So there's a lot of great programs and technologies out there. Again, having help with your auctions, always a great benefit. Promotions, you know, I think in the, you know, in my early days, we were doing an awful lot of flyer sharing, trying to put the promotional materials out at high traffic areas, trying to put the promotional materials maybe at businesses that delivered, and would they attach it as a supporter of the organization or the cause that we were serving. So again, the deliveries are right there on the next bullet. You know, maybe you need a photographer from your community, or a volunteer manager might be one of your positions that you need help with, so that you can have somebody focused on these initiatives, because the more you put into your volunteer program, the more you're going to get back. Bankers, finances, and obviously there's a lot of others. These are very customized to your particular organization, but thinking about those things that you really feel are gaps, that's where you want to start in making your wish list for volunteer needs. Again, I think job descriptions start to be incredibly important. Much like you wouldn't hire a new person on your team without a job description and some expectations being established and outlining the roles and responsibilities, you really should be doing the same level of work for your volunteer campaign. It's a one-time sort of thing that it's a little bit hard in the beginning to maybe carve out the time and get the documentation rolling. But if you can do it, then it's always easier going forward to simply edit and tweak the systems and the documentation. And you can even then enlist your volunteers if you have a key volunteer who maybe will serve in a certain role, and maybe they can review the job description and then ask for their input at the end of their service for, tweaks or add-ons or more details that they would recommend putting into that job description, so that it becomes easier to have these pieces also evolve. You can start to outline the process with the key volunteers. But at the very core, you want to list the roles and responsibilities that this person will serve. So for the job description, and it can all just be in one simple handbook too. If you have 4 or 5, main categories, you put the job title, put the overall summary, few bullet points. It helps people get, just acclimated with what's going to be expected. Talk about the amount of time required for this role. I found over the last few years that this becomes more and more important. A lot of people, they know they can give a little bit, but they're worried that if they volunteer, it might turn into a black hole. They might lose themselves. It might be a larger commitment than they can, really give of themselves to. And so if you can say this is going to be, a couple of hours one time of year, or this is going to be 1 hour per week for X number of weeks, it just helps make sure that the people you're talking to can evaluate if that's a time commitment that they can make to be successful in this role. Because the more successful they feel, the more likely you are to all succeed, and the more likely they are to want to serve in that role again too. List the dates and times for the involvement. Again, this can help you. In the early days, sometimes, we would talk about getting volunteers on board, but we wouldn't give the details of the event. So now we give the setup hours, we give the actual hours of the other shifts, we give the teardown hours. We really try to be, again, as detailed as we can, because then it helps people self-select where they fit in, and it prevents us down the road from having as many conflicts or having people say like, oh, I had something come up, I'm not going to be able to do that. Or, oh, I didn't know that was the date and time you'd need me, and I already have something on the calendar. So I really do think it seems like something so simple, but again, it's something we often know in our head. Oh, we expect the volunteers to come the day before and the afternoon and do the setup. But it turns out, right, the day before is a Thursday afternoon, and you're talking to people with full-time jobs who can't get out of work to help you set up. So they should have never volunteered for that segment of support. And so I think just really the clearer you can be, the less surprises, and the more it helps you down the road to already have things buttoned up in detail. I mentioned before that really having your trainings established before you even start recruiting is really important. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned around this is that you generally want to have your volunteer training really close to your event. Inevitably, we have a lot of projects where we'll start recruiting for volunteers, maybe as many as 3 months out. And inevitably, a lot of people will wait to volunteer if it's very event specific until they get closer to that event and they make sure that they don't have anything for work, their children don't have a sports tournament, they don't have something that, their family's expecting, them to attend, and then they will sign up. So people generally will still wait and sign up very, very close to an event. I'm sure that many of you know what I'm talking about. You're probably nodding your heads right now because of the fact that you go into 2 weeks out and you're so stressed about getting enough volunteers. And then, about 2 weeks out, people start to actually commit, fill out the paperwork, register, get it in. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, we're fine. So I encourage you to do the trainings close to the event, because inevitably a lot of signups come in the last days. And then are there other requirements that you have for your organization? I know that, one church that we worked with had Virtus training that certain people had to complete in order to volunteer. And so you want to include that because that's an additional commitment. And I know a lot of the sports programs do have a lot of other trainings that often have to be adhered to. So really just putting that into that initial outline becomes incredibly important to make sure people know what they're getting into. Because the other thing that happens, right, if somebody signs up and they're not clear on what the expectation is, then they've taken a slot that maybe somebody else was going to sign up for, but now you've told that second person, oh, we already have somebody in that role. And then you find out that, volunteer number one actually can't make the time commitment. And now you have nobody serving that role and you're left scrambling. So those are just a few of the reasons why I think these job descriptions and setting very clear expectations become incredibly important for your success. Preparing for the sign up, again, you want a process that's easy. You want to be able to, potentially even offer a couple of methodologies for signups. Being able to just remember that not everybody has the same access to technology. Not everybody has the same level of comfort with technology. Not everybody finds technology to be easy to use. Many people are intimidated by technology. And so trying to find a process that's easy and giving a couple of options so you really are not closing off any avenues of volunteer recruitment becomes incredibly important. Make sure you've got somebody dedicated to supervise this process and how that information is being managed. You don't want to just have all the information coming in. You want to make sure they're getting the confirmations. You want to make sure that they know what's going to be talked about, when the trainings are, when do they need to show up, when will they hear from you again. You want to make sure those automated messages are flowing if you've got auto replies set up, and just really continuing to stay in touch with those people. So having a dedicated person to oversee this, to monitor if people are signing up, are certain sections full, and do you need to try to ask some of those key volunteers from this task to maybe move over to task B, where you are really, still very incredibly short from what your ideal staffing plan would look like. I do encourage you all to have an ideal, I call them staffing plans. They're volunteer plans of how many volunteers you ideally would have in each different role and position, so that you do know when one section's full and it's ideal to move people to an alternative task. You want to make sure that everything's covered. And I encourage you to often we've added floater positions to our recruitment as well. And those floaters are meant to fill gaps where we do unfortunately have somebody who maybe got sick, couldn't show up, somebody who, unfortunately stuck in traffic, can't get there on time, whatever that situation might be. Having the floaters has allowed us to have people that we can count on to go in and fill those gaps so we don't have holes. Again, confirm the data you need to collect. Think about how you want to communicate. Texting is becoming more popular than ever before as a means of communication. And so does that become a matter of needing a cell number or confirming it's a cell number so that you can text people to remind them to check for their volunteer schedule or whatever that's going to look like for yourself? Establish that communication plan. I think knowing that, there's registration, there's a confirmation, then maybe, depending on how far out you are from your event, maybe 4 weeks out, you want to say, just a reminder, our trainings are going to be on XYZ dates and times. Please select one. Let us know when you'll be joining for volunteer training. Or we're getting excited, hope you are too. Another great thing in the communication plan is to also give your volunteers instructions on how to support your social media promotional campaign, because if you have followers that can share and engage and connect with your posts, that's going to help elevate the success of your event overall as well. And that's something volunteers would be happy to do probably. And then again, confirming that plan for onboarding and training. I think training needs to be really impactful. It needs to be concise, because volunteers are, our brains are full of our day-to-day regular routines and responsibilities. So you don't want to overload your volunteers. We like to generally give them kind of the high level of like what the event is, what the task is, why the role is important, why we need them, and what they help us accomplish. And then we really like to be able to also go into kind of the bullet points of what's expected of the jobs, what the project is, and help them understand how the different pieces plug into that overall. Open it up for questions. And with that bulleted list, we often like to give that as a handout so they have something to reference as well. And then you also have something to share. If people are in, lots of times people inevitably, not 100% of your volunteers will be able to make the trainings. And so having that bulleted list is something that you can again follow up, share after the training, and have on site for anybody who needs a refresher. I also encourage everybody in this sign up process to just find out from your volunteers what's their preferred method of communication. We naturally default as humans to our preferred method of communication, but looking at, do they prefer texting? Do they prefer email? Do they need a phone call? And just really letting them check a box to tell you what their preferred method is will also help you continue to forge a stronger relationship and have greater success in your programs. And I like to think about on the flip side too, making sure you do have, maybe it's your staff, maybe it's board members who also evaluate your volunteers, and thinking about what you need to evaluate if a volunteer is the right fit for a role, because not all volunteers are good at every position. We have some events where we have volunteers who need to ask for a donation, for example, and a lot of people are not comfortable making that ask. So, again, you want to have outgoing people. You're going to have some quieter volunteers, but again, the more you can communicate, this is an outgoing role. We need people who are spirited. We need people who are upbeat and energetic and like to interact with people. You're going to start to help people self-select if that's a good role for them or not an ideal fit. And so you're going to get better people in better positions. But then as they're in motion, you want to evaluate too and take notes so that as you assign volunteers in the future, you see what their skills and strengths are, and you can maybe reposition them if they're not in the right role, because some people may be very passionate and we just maybe assign them to the wrong task for that particular event. Recruiting volunteers was something that came up in the pre-event question, the pre-session questions. And I, really wanted to just do a short kind of brainstorm, kind of share some resources with you that I think can be very helpful. But, to start to think about parents and families, particularly of maybe some of the clients or the constituents that you may serve in your organization. So those people who have seen the value or the benefits of what you offer start to be one of the most natural sources to recruit your volunteers. You often probably have some advocates and fans on your email list. And so doing that outreach becomes really important, because you just sometimes got to ask and let people know you need help. And again, if you can bullet what kind of help you're looking for, people will read it and go, oh yeah, I'm going to raise my hand because that's me. So that's a great obvious place to start. Then, schools and churches, if depending on how community-based you are, we found that an awful lot of schools and churches make great partners with nonprofit organizations. They have ways, maybe again, some of your youth that you're serving might be in the local schools. The churches often have people who like to find ways to give back. So if you can forge those types of relationships to also share your volunteer needs, they can be a great tool for recruiting. School events, if you have a youth-based program and you have a good relationship with your school, often like at parent-teacher nights or school open houses, the schools will often let nonprofits set up a table to be able to interact with the parents and the families on that particular evening. So that might be a good place for you to tap into. You know, sharing information with your local newspaper. These days, it might be Block Club, it might be your online, media source for your community, but asking if they will post your need for volunteers and share that information can be good. Your local elected officials can also be equally as good in that regard, because most of your elected officials have newsletters and information that are going out. And it looks really good for those folks if they're helping their local nonprofit organizations. And so that's an easy way for them to be able to support you in a meaningful way without any, all they got to do is include that information in something that's already being done in their offices. Social media, again, post it out. I will say that one of the things I think is incredibly important, and I would talk about it, we have not seen this a lot, but we have seen in my 22 years of doing nonprofit work, we've seen 2 occasions where people did scam nonprofit organizations. And it was, luckily there were processes in place that it was caught and it was not a huge detriment. But I also want to use this as an opportunity to make sure that you are, again, maybe having conversations with some of the volunteers that maybe have not come through an organization. I think asking where they heard about your event or how they learned about this opportunity is a good way to just make sure that people are coming to you through some trusted sources. And if you have somebody who's a source you don't recognize, or you can't tie them back to something, like making sure they're not in a critical role. We have some cash handling roles, and then we have some non-cash handling roles. So people that we don't know on some of our projects, we introduce them to an event in a, maybe it is more of the front desk where they're checking people in. So we protect the organization, research those volunteers, even maybe make a call, right? If somebody is listing a source you don't recognize, to call them and have a conversation with them becomes important. So again, it's only happened twice in 22 years, which I think is pretty awesome. But making sure that you do take that into account when you're assigning roles and responsibilities is important. And posting on social media sometimes, I think, starts to open up the floodgates in a different way. So just being aware. Local businesses in your community can also be incredibly supportive. We've had where we've done some promotional programs where we've been able to invite local businesses to help us recruit volunteers. And if they can get, 10 volunteers for the event, we'll include their logo as a supporting partner of the project. So local businesses can be a great way to get people involved. A lot of your local banks, sometimes their dollars might be tapped, but sometimes they still have people that they can allocate or bring out. And so just tapping into those kinds of opportunities are really great. Park districts, they have a lot of programs, a lot of people come through their clubhouses. And so again, we find that if you have a good relationship there and you're able to put a flyer in their facilities or it be included in their emails, that those are other ways that you might be able to recruit your volunteers. And again, as you are doing that recruiting, I encourage you on any messaging that you may draft and put out to again make sure you're listing and including why this work matters and what you're hoping to accomplish with their support. Communication details are so incredibly important in this process. We've talked about it throughout this morning's session. You want to identify who will manage the communication. You want to know what that frequency is going to look like in your communication plan. Identify the methods. Is it 2 emails and 2 texts? Is it, going to be an email, upon confirmation, email every 2 weeks, up to the event? So just again, knowing what that frequency is ahead of schedule. And the more you can even get that prepared, as we get down to the wire on an event or a project, it just inevitably, things get busier. There's a lot more questions. There's a lot more details. So communication is something you can start to set up and draft far in advance so that you're ready to launch it when it's time to go. And so that is something you can do in the off season or during your slower periods at your organization to be able to then be prepared for your busiest time. And then again, send regular updates and reminders. I really continue to believe that communication is the key to success for all nonprofit organizations, all small businesses, everybody. And I always believe that we have so much going on in our own minds. We know more than we think, but it doesn't always come out and transfer from us to the other people. So the more details you can give, the more that I think you're going to be successful in these initiatives. And, you know, it's, sorry, I wanted to just finish this other thought. People tend to forget, you know, that volunteers don't know what you know. So just keeping them in the loop, sending them that additional information, and then putting those notes out in reminder fashion will also continue to be incredibly important. Again, talking about those communication preferences, email, text, is it one-on-one? You may have some key volunteer recruiters or volunteer resources or key players where that one-on-one becomes incredibly important. For us, a lot of times we may have a volunteer manager. Having that prep session where they get an extra training because they need to be more prepared to manage all of the volunteer groups that they're going to be managing. So getting prepared and looking at that becomes incredibly important. Looking at the group meetings. The other beautiful thing that comes out of the group meetings and the trainings is that people start to get a little more excited. You also have the ability for people to ask questions and they hear additional details and information. And your organization may have other tools or apps or technology that you use for communication. So just making sure you know how you're engaging your audience is really important. Again, we talked about evaluating your candidates. You want to work on a succession plan. And I think that this is where, again, having that general job description, then outlining what the process is from some of the highest level tasks. There might be certain pieces that you don't need as much detail for, but I think every role that you could possibly need help with does have some guidelines, some expectations, and some process that might be useful to hand off to the future people. And so what we have done with a lot of our projects is when we have a really great, again, when you're monitoring your volunteers and you see who perform certain tasks really well, then you're able to go back to them. You're able to say, like, you were a rock star. Could you help me detail out the steps that you took to be successful so that we can share it with other volunteers? They're going to feel great pride, and normally they will be happy to help you document and get a more detailed description for each of those positions. So I encourage you to enlist those resources to keep things moving forward for your organization without creating additional work for you. And then managing your volunteers. We've talked about the training and how important it is. We've talked about sharing your goals and sharing your vision. Again, are there rules and regulations? We like to set clear expectations. We like to, even in the last few years, we've gone as far as establishing a code of conduct. Again, we've worked with large volumes of volunteers over the years, and we've again seen a couple of unfortunate situations, but we have protocols for when a volunteer can be removed. We have protocols for certain behaviors that will not be accepted as a volunteer or a representative of the organization. Reminding your volunteers that they are the representation and an extension of your organization, and how important it is for them to put their best foot forward is also a valuable thing to cover in your training session. And I think it's always our goal and our role to protect your volunteers. And for we've had a couple of situations, because we do some large scale events where people get angry and volunteers are put in some difficult situations. And so having protocols that protect your volunteers from not being berated, belittled, or attacked by any of your general attendees becomes really important. Maybe somebody had too much to drink and they're getting a little too fresh. You don't want a volunteer to feel like they're being infringed upon, because that's just not appropriate. And so we have to think about some of the sexual harassment, some of the general code of conduct that might apply to our organization on a staffing level, and also apply it on the volunteer level so that our volunteers really do feel protected and that they enjoy their experience volunteering, because that's that's how you're going to keep people engaged in this process. You really do want to continue developing relationships. Again, I think the walk around, the checking in with volunteers at the event, the training helps put faces with names these days when we're always sending out emails and they may not know you as much. You might even want to send out a video with Zoom and all of the technology these days. Even sending a video welcoming or guiding or giving the volunteer training can be useful so that people start to feel a little more connected to you. Then at the event, make sure you're walking around, you're checking in with people. And if it's not you, right, because maybe you've got 50 other responsibilities at the, at the event, but have a volunteer manager or have your board do some of those check-ins so that you can take notes about the rock star volunteers. You can continue to forge those relationships. And again, when you check in with your volunteers on site during a project or an event, they know that they matter because you took time to say hello and a personal thank you. Other things at the end of the volunteer session that I think are incredibly important, and I'm going to run through these kind of quickly so that we can get to questions, but express gratitude. I've given so much, so many times, and the number of times that people have just not said thank you made me not always want to go back to an organization to support again. There's one client that I've seen do this incredibly well. They do so many thank you notes, handwritten, personalized after an event, that it amazes me. Not everybody can do that, but even a general thank you, even an acknowledgement of like sharing out the recap of the event or the project. What was accomplished? How many people did you serve? How did you do on hitting those goals that you shared at the beginning of the project? People like to know if it was a success, and reminding them that they were part of that success can go a long way in retaining those volunteers. I encourage organizations to conduct a survey because oftentimes your volunteers will see things you didn't see. They will have a different perspective than what you had, and you will have the opportunity to get feedback from them for improvement overall in how you handle things going forward. Ask right then and there, in that survey or at the end, would you be willing to volunteer again? Ask for that renewal, get them on board early. Ask if they want to do additional volunteer efforts. Do they have any friends or contacts who might also want to volunteer in the future? It's a great way, if they've had a good experience, to encourage them to identify and ask other people to join you. And then post stories and pictures on your social media. Leverage this out, even in your emails. People like to see themselves. So being able, we often think a lot about our highest donors. We often think a lot about showcasing our board members and all of those people at the most prestigious levels. But what about the volunteers who make it all possible? Being able to just share them and promote them out there will again give them a bigger sense of pride in their personal feeling of how valued they were. Share public praise. It's always great to, when people hear the gratitude from the podium. Oftentimes speakers get nervous. You have to actually write the thank you to the volunteers, sometimes into the script, and make sure it's on somebody's radar. But that a volunteer in the audience who hears a thank you from the podium can be incredibly valuable. And then continuing to share those success stories on a year-round basis. Hopefully your volunteers are all on your e-newsletter sign up. And so hearing those success stories, seeing those success stories, easy for me to say, over the course of the year, reminds them that they were part of that and keeps them tethered to your organization in a positive way. Postseason, as I mentioned, that is one way to stay connected. Do check-ins. Sometimes people will have a special volunteer recognition event during the course of the year. You may want to review surveys for updates. Reach out to those recommended volunteers and introduce yourself. Maybe have a volunteer recruitment event, coffee, a happy hour, bring people together depending on kind of the culture of your organization and what makes sense. Continue sharing updates about how things are going, even sharing out just even a happy holidays email, or happy Thanksgiving. Those are things you can do with your volunteer pool that will help you stay connected and remind them that, you really do value them as people and not just, as a source to get the work done. Offer additional praise when possible. Again, maybe a planning session, you might invite some of them. If you find that some of them are particularly good at brainstorming or had great ideas, you may want to bring them in as well. With that, I will open this up to questions and just see if anybody has any questions at this time that we have not covered. So we have a question. Do you believe it's effective for current volunteers to recruit future volunteers, or should that recruitment only come from the organization? I think that it is wonderful for you to engage everybody in recruiting. Usually most of our projects and our organizations are the more the merrier, because you always have needs for volunteers and more work than you can possibly get done on your own. So I think that it's really important to invite others to recruit. And again, the importance of knowing your rock stars. I will say sometimes you may have a volunteer who's really kind and passionate, but maybe they have some limitations in what they can perform. And so even kind of meeting with the other volunteers, if you have the luxury of having somebody who's dedicated to volunteers, who can then, do a quick check-in with those people, talk about their experiences, what makes them qualified for volunteering in a certain position in the future, it can help you also vet that the right people are in the right roles, because you can't just always take all of the applications at face value in the registrations, but that's really important. Let's see, the other thing, trying to just make sure I'm watching both the chat and the Q&A. And the question came in pre-session about rewarding and offering incentives to volunteers and what works. The comment was, we want to make sure our volunteers feel appreciated and avoid burning them out. And this is a great question. So a lot of people do come for the reward of helping and contributing. One of the things that we've done with some of our largest projects, when we need to go find those 600 volunteers, and it might be a little more difficult, is that we break it down into bite-sized chunks, for sure. And then we look at, we've created a volunteer grant program with some of our projects. And so that is where we will give other nonprofits in our community, we may give them a stipend per volunteer that works with us. And so this works out really well with like friends of the school groups. A lot of them not only have the parent teacher organization or association, but then they also have maybe a friends of, maybe it is the PTO, but sometimes those groups are looking for ways to make money and they have all the parents. And so being able to invite them to participate and contribute to your event is good. And then they may get a stipend back to their organization. So that can be a good reward. We sometimes will give, depending, it's food, beverage. I've seen really well where some people get a discounted ticket to maybe your high profile event. And so people who want to go and support you, but maybe can't afford the high price ticket, it's a great way for them to be able to feel like they're connected to you. Obviously, you have to make sure you're not losing money on however much you give away that ticket. But it can be a really great reward. It might be drink tickets at the event that you can offer to a volunteer. It can be, as Craig mentioned, it's good PR for the event and the nonprofit by issuing grants out to those local groups, as we talked about. Sometimes it's a volunteer t-shirt. Maybe if you have basket raffles, it could be, a limited number of entries for your volunteers in exchange for their service. But I really find that most of the time, people are not looking for something tangible that you give them. They're looking for a feeling. And so these things, the way you can include pictures, the way you could even do a dedicated email after the event to say thank you to our volunteers who made it all possible is great. Some people have programs where you sign up, they're paid programs, but if you have volunteer hours, you may also get a discount. And then I see we're tracking volunteer hours over time so that we have data to share with the board and summarize the impact of our volunteers. That is fabulous, because I do think that the more you know about how many volunteer hours you need and how it contributes to your overall success is incredibly valuable in the long run. So that is really great. I'm glad to hear that. And then I would just add today, we are here at Big Buzz, we've added 2 new programs in the last 18 months to service nonprofit organizations who are really trying to thrive and grow. And in addition to these breakfast clubs, what we do is the week following, we do a session called the Roundtable. And several of you also have, if you've just signed up to Big Buzz Resources, you may be entitled to a free attendance at next week's Roundtable. So we, to obtain that registration, you will just email us back and express interest in attending, and we will get that verified and get you on that list. If you are interested in attending and you are not a recent sign up but would like to join us, we invite you to do so. There will be a link in the follow-up email today where you can register for the roundtable. And during that roundtable, we will actually talk. It is a group discussion where everybody gets to be able to ask their questions, talk more about their programs, share between organizations, because we want to continue to bring people together and foster best practices in the industry. And then I'm also pleased to announce that Big Buzz has launched a Power Cell program. And the Power Cell program is a mastermind that we take 3 nonprofit executives and put them with 2 other, it's a total of 3, 1 plus 2 others, where you have a confidential space to be able to ask your questions, talk about your particular challenges, and get ideas from other peers in the industry in a confidential setting. It's been incredibly powerful for a lot of people because nonprofit leaders are always on. You have to be on for your board, your staff, your the audiences and the populations you serve, your volunteers. So this is a safe space meant for you, and that is a year-long program that meets once a month. And we would invite you, if you're interested, we've got new groups forming this fall and would invite you to consider that. And then I just saw one more question come in. Could you share tips on how to form partnerships with other organizations, sororities, universities, professors, etc., to source a large volunteer group? And partnerships and collaboration, I think it is the name of the game. I think if you can find organizations, maybe you have an organization that you know of that they are, their large event is maybe the opposite time of year for your event, but maybe you have similar missions. So maybe you can cross promote, maybe you can cross source. Otherwise, if there is a group that makes sense for you to help, a lot of groups need service hours, high school students, college students. So being able to know about those programs and reaching out can be really good. And so for the most part, put your thinking cap on and absolutely reach out and ask for those things. Even some large companies reaching out to the HR department about volunteer sharing opportunities within their organizations can also be very useful. With that, we are at time. This morning has gone incredibly fast. I hope you've all had some great takeaways, and I thank you very much for joining us for the Big Buzz Breakfast Club. Have a great day.